Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Good to be back behind the mic. It was a good weekend for me. Good hangout with the boys out on the golf course out at Mountain Dell. Good time out there. I was going to do like a golf course ranking to start the show, but there's just nothing better than a good round with the boys. There's just nothing tops that. It was a good time. I think we ended up playing 24 holes, 22, 23. I can't remember, but we had to settle a little competition, and so we went a little bit extra. Shout out to Mountain Dell for being so accommodating, and they weren't accommodating. They had no idea, I don't think. But anyways, it was a good time. Mountain Dell's a great course. But yeah, just nothing tops a good 18 holes with the boys. So, on today's episode, I'm going to run through fall camp preview for the running back position. Excited to talk about that group. And then I was also listening to another podcast, Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson, formerly of PFF. They had a pretty interesting conversation that I started to think, in terms of what that means for Utah, and in their conversation centered around the most essential non-QB on every team's roster. And it was fascinating to listen to it and all that. So I had a hard time settling on who is the most essential non-QB on the team, but I've got 5 guys that I'm going to run through. And I actually want to hear from you guys, who you think is the most essential player, non-quarterback player on Utah's roster this season. Like I said, I've got 5 guys that I go back and forth on in terms of, what they mean to this team and just how essential they are. So, excited to talk about that. But let's dive into Utah's running back position. This is going to be a fun group, I think, this season. So, a little fall camp preview. Going to add a little video here of the running back spot. I'm like I said, this is going to be a pretty interesting, pretty exciting group this season, I think. This is an entirely new room for Utah football, and yet there's a lot of optimism, confidence even, that this group is just going to perform. And obviously, I think that's due in part to, the history and tradition of production under Kyle Whittingham and just the reputation that Utah has running the ball, which they've earned over the years. I think that's certainly plays a role in it. But I think most of the credit should revolve around what Utah's done and who they've brought in to carry the rock. And I think that's going to be the key here is, Utah's brought in some good players, I think. So the Utes have 6 new running backs that they're going to be working with as they go into fall camp, headlined by one of the top transfer portal running backs in the class this year, in the cycle, in Wayshawn Parker. Utah also brought in Kerry Rogers from New Mexico, Devin Green from UNLV, and Daniel Bray from the high school ranks, at the mid-year point. And then, following spring ball, they also brought in Old Dominion transfer Bryce Duke and welcome in another high school running back, Racine Guillory, who was another standout out of Texas as well. So that's going to be the group that Utah works with this season. Before we dive into the keys for fall camp, let's go back. Let's revisit what happened during spring ball. So obviously incorporating an entirely new collection of players can be pretty tough, but if there's a position that you can afford to do it without much worry, that's running back. And I think obviously with a whole new group, there wasn't a huge adjustment. Obviously, you've got to develop chemistry in terms of taking the handoffs from the quarterbacks and getting a feel for the offensive line blocking in front of you. But, running back is still probably the easiest position to make a significant transition in, whether it be, an individual going up a level in competition or whether you're bringing in an entirely new group of running backs, just given the position and sort of how you find success. A lot of it is just natural ability, and so that's encouraging. So even though there is a lot of new players, and a lot of um, you know getting familiar with these guys, I think running back position is a position that you can afford to do that. So I think first and foremost with this group, obviously headlined by Wayshawn Parker, and there's a lot of excitement around him. There was, especially during spring ball, but given the significance of his addition, it was really understandable that a lot of Utah fans were excited to hear about him, hear about how he was performing in spring ball, and I think it was interesting seeing him for the first time. I had a bit of whiplash from the double take. I thought I was looking at Jalen Glover. It was surprising watching Wayshawn Parker on film. Like I never made that comparison, but then seeing him in person, and I think it was mostly the fact that he was wearing number one, and they have sort of a similar build. Wayshawn Parker is obviously a bit taller, but I've heard that from a number of people is that Wayshawn looks like Jalen, but their games are noticeably different. And I think that was really apparent. And with Wayshawn, it took him some time to get acclimated within the group, within the offense over spring ball. And Coach Mark Atuaya, who's been a really fun presence, for Utah since he joined the program back in December. He shared that Wayshawn actually had minor offseason surgery that sort of prevented him from being involved in winter conditioning much. So spring ball was his big way of ramping up his conditioning, and you could tell the difference from the early part of camp to where he finished. He looked like a much different running back to finish camp. So he ended on a upward trajectory, and I think that's the big key was seeing that difference in him from where he started to where he finished. And I think with Parker's ramp up over the course of spring ball, that actually provided the other three running backs that Utah had in camp a lot of opportunity and a lot of work. And I think Utah has a much better feel for what they have behind Wayshawn. And that's going to be big for Jason Beck, for Mark Ottawaya. Nakari Rogers got a lot of work, and I think that he was going to get a lot of work regardless because of his experience in this offense under Jason Beck last year at New Mexico. But then, other guys, Devin Green and Daniel Bray got a lot of work and got really comfortable and were able to showcase sort of their own dynamic ability, what they bring to the table that's unique to the room. And I think Utah learned a good deal about those two and what they could potentially add to this room, this season. So I think that was really beneficial for Utah to have those three get a lot of work and hopefully in the long run it pays off. So, with this group getting into fall camp, I think again there's three keys for Utah that I'm interested in. I think it starts primarily with Wayshawn Parker. After spring ball and the slow start there, I think it's important that Wayshawn gets off to a strong start in fall camp. I think this is a big opportunity for him, coming to Utah after a true freshman campaign in which he ran for 735 yards and 4 touchdowns on 137 carries. He also added about 110 yards and on 11 receptions. I think there's plenty of room for an increased workload in both phases. I think he can get to 160, 170 carries this season, and also seeing an increase in his work in the passing game where he can get to potentially 15, 20 receptions this season. So, there's a lot of opportunity for him this season. I think things are pointing to him being the guy, and I think Parker needs to come into this. Wayshawn needs to come into this fall camp, with that sort of mindset that this has to be and is going to be a big season for him. I think coming into camp ready to go, ready to hit the ground running, will be important to sort of set the tone on what we can expect from him. And I think there's a handful of good running backs coming back in the Big 12, but the conference said goodbye to a lot of really good ones too. Nine of the top 12 producers last year are now gone. And so this conference is kind of wide open, and it leaves an opportunity for Wayshawn to potentially put himself at the forefront of the conversation at that running back position, which I think is could be fun. So, I think it's important that Wayshawn comes into fall camp ready to go and ready to get after it. The next key for me, key number two for the running backs, is Coach Atuaya, but mostly Coach Beck, need to identify a good top three. At New Mexico, Beck featured a three-back rotation, all of whom got work over the course of a game and pretty consistently, and each brought a different element or look to the offense. Eli Sanders was the all-around back who got a lot of the work, while Javen Jacobs provided more of an explosive, versatile option. He's a threat both in the passing game and the running game. And then, Kerry Rogers played the tough short yardage type of role. And I think we all know that Parker and Rogers are kind of viewed in that rotation, being, having their spots pretty secure in that three-man rotation. So this is about finding that third guy. Who can be that third guy? It could be Daniel Bray, who had a really, really good spring. He provided an explosive element that I think Utah has been looking for, having that dynamic athleticism within this group. It could be, one of the Swiss Army knives that Utah has in Nate Johnson and Hunter Andrews. Maybe those guys can sort of add to that versatility, explosive element that in the mold of a Javen Jacobs. So I think that's going to be important for this group, and for Coach Beck specifically, is finding a good three-man rotation that sort of fits that same sort of dynamic that he had at New Mexico, where he has three guys that he knows can play a certain role and can do it at a really good level and provide different elements to the running game. So I think that's going to be really important, is Atuai and Beck finding a third running back to feature in that rotation. And then lastly, the third key is getting a feel for, Bryce Duke and Racine Guillory. Depth is super important at running back, and Utah fans have experienced what it's like to not have depth at the position, and what that means. And I think going into the season with six capable backs feels like a positive, but that's obviously going to be dependent upon what Duke and Guillory prove capable of providing in fall camp. So I'll start with the freshman Guillory. I think it's vital, that Utah fans remember that he's supposed to be going into his senior season of high school. He reclassified from the 2026 class to join the season this program. So he's still young. He's still only 17 years old. So he's missing a year of development, both mental and physical, that other freshman running backs typically have. So I think, it's important to keep that in mind with Guillory, is that he's coming in a year younger than your typical freshman. And yet, there's certainly a possibility that he comes in and he wows everybody. He impresses. And Utah has shown a willingness to incorporate freshmen that are able to do that. But I think it's, again, I would just err on the side of patience with him, that if, things don't pop with him, like, it's not a big deal. It's not a big worry. Utah would much rather have him in the program this season than not. That way they can keep a watchful eye on him and his development and be involved in it that way. And I think, Guillory is a fantastic talent. There's no denying that. I think he's got a tremendous ceiling, and I think he can be a really dynamic running back at Utah. But again, he's just 17 years old, so let's be patient. And then with Duke, Bryce Duke coming in from Old Dominion, he was a former Virginia Tech running back, and he's got some ability, he's got some potential, and I think coming here to Utah, he's motivated to potentially make it happen here and take a bigger step, as a running back, and become more of a contributor than what he's been over the course of his career. There's a lot of motivation on his end to do that, and I think getting a feel for what he can provide. He's a bigger back at 210 pounds, 6 foot. He's got some athleticism that could potentially fit that third running back role, where he can provide a little bit of juice, maybe, and we'll see. But I think it's that's the next big key is getting a feel for what you have in Bryce Duke, and then what you have in the freshman Racing Guillory. And if those guys prove capable of contributing this fall, like, you feel really good about the depth that you have at running back this season, especially running behind this offensive line. So yeah, I think those are the big three keys for Utah with this running back position. And again, I think there's a lot of optimism around Wayshawn Parker and his potential this season. I think he can really come into, if he can really come into fall camp, ready to get after it from day one, sort of set the tone. That will get me pretty excited, pretty fired up, because I think he's poised for a big year. I think, it's not out of the realm of possibility that, he gets to, he eclipses the 4-digit mark, in terms of rushing numbers this season, rushing yards this season. I think he's got that kind of potential running behind this offensive line. And I think he can become, the top dog in the Big 12 conference. So those are my thoughts on the running back position. Let's now talk most essential non-quarterback on this Utah roster. Who is Utah's most essential non-QB? This was an interesting thing for me to go through, and I think it'll be kind of the same for everybody listening. At least I hope so. That's why I'm doing this. But like I said earlier, I was listening to a podcast, two former PFF guys, and they had this conversation going through each and every NFL roster and naming the most essential non-QB on the roster. And I just think it's a good way to highlight some of the important pieces on this roster. And as I went through this, I had a few things that I kept in mind as I sort of evaluated the options on Utah's roster. And so here's what I considered when going through this. And then I'll get to the 5 players that I'll make a case for. And then, like I said earlier, I want to hear from you guys who you actually think is the most essential non-QB on the roster. So, here's the things that I consider. First of all, just your overall impact on the game. Obviously, pretty straightforward. You've obviously got to be making a pretty big impact to be the most essential player beyond the quarterback, just behind the quarterback. So from snap to snap, week to week, what is the overall impact that this player is making? 2, game-changing ability. That's not something that is easy to come by. It takes elite talent. It takes elite ability to make game-changing plays and to do it at a consistent rate. And so, those guys are hard to find. They're hard to replace. And so that's another thing. How much is it just truly elite that you just can't replicate it with somebody else? Third thing that I considered was positional versatility and flexibility. So players with greater versatility within a certain position, a certain spot, who are able to do a variety of different things to maximize the potential of that position is a big thing. It's something that allows them to stay on the field more. And then positional flexibility. What different roles, what different positions can you play? Can you play, on the other side of the ball, can you play special teams? Those are things that I considered as well. Leadership and enhancing the play and the value of those around him. Obviously, leadership comes in different forms. Some are vocal, some lead by example, but in the end, they are sort of the tone setters for a football team, and it's impossible to quantify one's ability to raise the level of play around him, but it's a thing, right? I think the perfect example of this is a defensive tackle's ability to occupy blocks, which frees up those around him to make plays, right? So a player that is willing to sacrifice for the betterment of those around him. I think that's a big thing. And then the last thing that I considered here was the depth behind him. It's impossible to replace these types of players, but some positions have depth to manage a little bit better in the event of an injury. So those are the things that I considered. So here's my list, and this isn't ranked in any sort of order, but I'll start with Spencer Fano. Obviously, You know the deal with him. He is one of the top offensive tackles, offensive linemen, one of the top players, regardless of position, in college football this season. You don't take for granted what this season could be for Spencer Fano. He is a truly special talent. I've said it time and time again, but take some time this season just to watch him specifically. I know that we all, we're watching the plays and we're watching the game and all that sort of stuff. We're watching the ball. Take one series a game and just watch him do his thing. It is truly special. And obviously, as a projected top 10, top 5 pick in next year's draft, it's hard to find those types of talents. And for him to have played as consistently as he has is just, it's remarkable. And so obviously he has positional flexibility in the sense that he can play right or left side. He could probably play inside really effectively too. And, there's his what he's done to raise the bar where he was weak as a freshman in the run game. He turned that into his greatest strength last season. And so, he is just an elite talent, and it's hard to find those types of dudes. So Spencer Fano leads us off here as a potential, the leading candidate, I guess we could say, as Utah's most essential non-QB. Next up, in the trenches as well, on the other side of the ball, though, Dallas Vakalahi. We saw the flashes of his potential last season, and he seems primed for a bigger role, bigger impact in year two. Over the years at Utah, we've seen what good defensive tackle play means to the Utah defense, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I think there is a real ability within that Utah defensive tackle position to raise the level of play, raise the value of those around him. When you've got defensive tackles that can control the line of scrimmage, it really allows those around him, linebackers behind them, defensive ends to either side of them, to make plays. It frees them up to be playmakers. And so, there is a bit of a mindset of a team first mindset where you're kind of sacrificing your own playmaking sometimes to allow others to make those plays. But I think Dallas Vakalahi can really emerge as not only that type of tackle, but also as a playmaker where he can make those plays behind the line of scrimmage as well and add value in that sense. So, listening to him, hearing from him during spring ball, it's clear that he's bought into the culture, the mindset of a Utah defensive tackle. I buy into his leadership, as all the young players talked about, his role and their acclimation in the program. So for me, and then obviously, getting to that point, when you look at the depth chart at defensive tackle, it's Dallas Vakalahi, Aliki Vamahi, Jonah Lea'ea as the guys that return with playing time under their belt. Beyond that, it's a lot of youth and inexperience. So Dallas Vakalahi is a key piece in that sense as well, as in terms of it's essential that Utah keeps him on the field. So Dallas Vakalahi. Next up, Smith Snowden. I thought Snowden took a big step forward last season as a cornerback. You saw much more consistent coverage in the sense that he eliminated receivers, he made plays, broke up passes. We saw a little bit more playmaking on the ball with a couple interceptions. Two really, I mean, some of the most impressive interceptions that I've seen, in my years covering it, where he ripped the ball out of the Utah State receivers' hands. He came across the field against UCF in the blink of an eye to pick it off and take it back for 6. It was really encouraging to see that from him. We also saw a little positional flexibility when he, started returning kicks on special teams. I think that is additional value. And now, as Coach Whittingham revealed at Big 12 Media Days, he's also going to be adding some offensive snaps to his resume as well and become more of a two-way player. So there's that sort of elite ability that you just can't replicate. Like you see it with him, you see the athleticism, you see it pop. Time and time again, and I think that just speaks to, his overall talent level and ability. And obviously, when Utah has a really good cornerback, on that defensive side of the ball, it does a lot for the rest of the defense. And I think Smith Snowden is entering this season with that sort of mindset of taking on that CB1 mentality and becoming a truly dynamic shutdown corner, but also taking on so much more. So tough to find these types of athletes, these type of kids that can do all that. Number 4 on my list, again, not ranked, just the fourth guy I'm mentioning here, Lander Barton. Obviously, last year was not what anyone expected for him. The struggles early on, I think it was clear, and Coach Whittingham, Coach Swan, Coach Scally have all talked about it, that Lander was still recovering from his foot injury that he suffered in 2023. And whether that's physically, whether that's just mentally, regaining the confidence needed to play the game that to play his game at the level that he was prior to that injury, it can take time. And regaining trust in a vital body part in football, your foot, that's tough, man. That can take time. And so for him, it took nearly the entire season to regain that confidence. But over the final month, we saw Lander regain, those playmaking qualities, the elite linebacker potential that we saw from him, in 2023 prior to his injury. So it was good to see that from him. But also, this was pretty interesting hearing this from Smith Snowden at Big 12 Media Days, that the players around him saw the pain that he was playing through, and that sort of was it represented a lot of leadership that didn't get acknowledged publicly. Lander was willing to go out there, play through the pain, fight through the pain, and be out there to play for Utah. And that was something that I think a lot of players, Smith said this essentially, that players look to that as a really big deal. And again, that speaks to the sort of leadership. Lander isn't the most vocal player. He's not the most vocal athlete, but he leads by example. He sets the tone on that defensive side of the ball with the way that he plays the game, with the toughness that he plays with. And that's hard to find as well. And then, when you consider what he's able to do and the ways that he's able to impact games, right? So obviously, making tackles across the field, sideline to sideline, that's going to be key for him. And we started to see more of that ability. We saw him clean up the missed tackles that were haunting him early on in the year. We saw him clean that up by the end of the season. We also have seen him make plays behind the line of scrimmage, both in terms of attacking the line of scrimmage against the run, but also getting after the quarterback and getting sacks. And we've also seen him make some interceptions. The pick six streak lives on because of Lander Barton last season. And so that's sort of maximizing that positional versatility where he can do a lot of different things in a certain role. And now he's going to add some positional flexibility where he's going to start playing a little bit of offense, play some tight end, and add that to his resume as well. So, Lander Barton is a pretty essential player in my opinion as well. And then the fifth one here that I'll mention, and I went back and forth on a couple of guys. Caleb Lomu is a key piece that certainly deserves mention here. But I went with Teo Johnson as another guy on this list. And, it gets back to sort of the history and tradition of this Utah defense. When there's a really good free safety patrolling the center field in the defensive secondary, good things tend to happen for Utah. And, last season was his first year at free safety. And, I thought he made plays. He has the makings of a really good free safety. But you could sort of tell that, there was an adjustment to that role, to playing, that position. It's just a different feel, a different mindset that you have to be. You have to view the game in a totally different way than what he was previously as a nickel corner, where, he's focused so much on what's right in front of him. Now he's got to see the whole field, and that can take time to make that adjustment. And so, I feel like him going into year two in this free safety spot, I think he's going to look much more comfortable and confident in what he's doing. And when you consider his career so far, the positional flexibility where he started at receiver, played some nickel, has now moved back to free safety. He took some reps at cornerback as well. There's a lot of positional flexibility and positional versatility as well with him, where he can do a variety of different things, which is really, really valuable in that free safety role. So, given his experience, his overall experience in the program, I think that's vital. He should know the assignments and responsibilities of the entire defensive secondary like the back of his hand by now. And I think that's going to be huge. So those are the five guys, the five non-QB most essential players on Utah's roster, in my opinion. And like I said, I'd be curious to hear from you guys who you think is the most essential of that group. And if I didn't mention someone that you think deserves a mention here, I'd love to hear it as well. So that'll do it for me. I'll be back later this week with another episode. I'll probably start doing a couple position group fall camp previews, because we are literally a week away from fall camp kicking off, which is super exciting. So appreciate everybody for tuning in, for supporting the Utah Blockcast. Like I said, I'll be back later this week with another episode.